I'm at the old rectory at Epworth for today's masterclass. Built in 1709, this was the childhood home of John Wesley, who founded Methodism, and his brother Charles, who wrote some of the most loved hymns. My name's Guy Lewis, and today I'll be presenting one of 3 sessions on general data protection regulation. So in the 3 sessions, we're going to look at why GDPR was introduced, some explanation of the terms used and examples of these, and look at some of the data that is protected by the regulation. So when GDPR was introduced, it was found to be complex and difficult. It was thought of as an additional burden and bureaucracy. So today what I want to do is break that down a little bit and simplify it, give clear, easy guidance to ensure compliance, and ensure you understand what you need to do. So I just want to go back over the timetable for legislation. We had the Data Protection Act in 1998, which was more about the sort of printed data. And then we moved more into the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation in 2003. That was followed by the GDPR regulation in April 2016, which then became enforceable the 25th of May in 2018. So why was there a new GDPR regulation? Well, that was mainly due to the huge increase in e-commerce and artificial intelligence that was being used around that data. Social media has proved to be a huge source of data, and that, along with the Internet of Things and big data processing, people have found that the results they're getting from this processing is much different to what the people were expecting, and that the information that was around was much more in need of control. GDPR has a European provision. It is not an EU regulation, but it's a regulation that has been agreed between EU and Britain. It was enforced in May 2018, and it's Brexit agnostic. What I want to look at initially is this sort of a summary that GDPR really comes down to 2 things: contract or consent. A contract is something where you have a reason to do business with somebody, it's a legitimate reason, and GDPR covers that sort of relationship. Whereas the other on consent is more about having a positive opt-in, about someone saying, yes, I want to receive that. So we will look at this in terms of contract and consent as we go through. So what are the new features of GDPR? Well, there's a new definition for personal data and special categories of personal data. There's also new obligations for data processors, people that actually sort of manipulate, store, change that data. And there's improved rights for the data subjects, for the clients, me and you. We've got new definitions about consent and also the lawful basis for processing personal data. And through all this, accountability is emphasised. So data protection must be part of design, i.e. if you put a system together, it must have data protection at the heart of it. And the onus is on the business to show compliance to that regulation. So who does GDPR apply to? Well, it applies to data processors, I've already mentioned. And what's a data processor? These are people that obtain, store, action on, modify, update, delete, or manipulate data. Quite often they're told what to do, but they actually do it. So they may be told by somebody else. Data controllers, these are people that own the data and they control the data processing. They actually set out how the data is processed and why the data is being processed. You can also be a data controller and processor, where you both decide how the data is being processed, but you actually carry out that function as well. The data subjects. So who are data subjects? They're your clients, potential clients, employees, subcontractors, partners, associates. Me and you are both clients. Even though we might be businesses, we might be involved with businesses, we are also clients as well. And this is very, very useful when you're trying to comply to GDPR, is actually you can put yourself in that position of the client. How do I feel? We'll touch this later on in the video. So good examples of how the controller and processor is maybe look at a theme park which sells products, business to consumer. The business itself has a sales team, a sales director and accounts, and they're all involved in the transaction. So the customer is the data subject, that's Jill, she's the client, and actually the data controller is the sales manager. They're the one that have got data on Jill, they've got her name, they might have her email address, they might have her address, they might have a phone number, they have the data. And then actually what the sales manager will do is actually use the processors, maybe Stephen's accounts, to process that data to in effect give Jill a bill. Within that you may again have Mary, who's a sales administrator. She may be processing that data in a way of communications, in terms of marketing material, etc. So the owner is the sales manager, and the processors are the people that are doing work for them. And another example may be where you've got a company which outsources its payroll. So again, there as a controller might be the director of the company who's saying, here's some data, here's some personal data, hands that over to a payroll company, and the employee Lynn gets paid. So when you look at that, the controller is the director, the processor, the data processor is the external accounts, the person that's doing payroll, and the data subject is the employee is Lynn. So we've talked about data controllers and we've talked about data processors and their relationship with the client, with the data subject. But you can actually be the data controller and data processor. And the example we're looking at here is that Jill owns a bed and breakfast, and she owns the data of her data subject, of Lynn the client. She might have a name, she might have an address, a contact number, or a phone number, all personal data. So she owns the data, therefore the controller, but she's also actually dictating how is that processed. So she might say that is actually put on the bill, that's actually stored in my system, so I can actually send a questionnaire or a follow-up email. So she's both controlling, she owns the data, but she's also processing it as well. So what we have to do is ensure that decision makers and key people in your organisation are aware that the law has changed. You need to look at your organisation's risk register if you have one, and you have to establish what data activities go on inside your business. So I mentioned the word risk register, which is always a bad terminology, but there's only three things to look at on a risk register. There's financial risk, there's operational risk, and there's reputational risk. So financial risk might be that payments are overdue, or that you've not got the right cash flow. You haven't got enough money to pay the bills, even though you've got a great order book. Operationally, it might be about IT systems, or it might be about policies, it might be about training. And reputational might be about data breaches, certainly in this way. It might be things that are said on social media, or it might be the quality or of your service or product. So what you can do in a risk register is you rate how the value of the rating is very high risk or it's a very medium risk, and then you also mitigate it with certain things. So certainly if you're looking at data breaches, you would actually look at how do you actually get a better data security in your system. So what is personal data? It's information relating to an identifiable natural person. So firstly, what's a natural person? Well, that's someone who's living. And that data is things such as name, address, email, telephone number, an IP address, i.e. where they may access the internet from, a MAC address, which is actually the address of an individual electronic device, such as a PC or laptop or phone, or it might be their online ID. You can also have anonymized data, which is things like physical or physiological or genetic or mental or economic data, cultural or social identity. And what you have to be careful is that you don't use this data and by filtering actually make it so you can identify that person. Other special categories of personal data: racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, training union membership, things concerning health or sexual orientation, or general data or biometric data. I would suggest that actually no one in this group actually would be looking at saving sensitive personal data. So we've looked at why GDPR was introduced, we've given some explanation of the terms used and the examples of these, and we've looked at some of the data that is protected by the regulation. So this is the end of session 1 of 3 on GDPR. I hope you found the session interesting and useful.